America's top diplomat dashing around Asia to tackle hot issues in the region and sharing an important message from his travels.
Even as we are intensely focused on the crisis in Gaza, we're also very much engaged and focused on the important work that we're doing in the Indo-Pacific.
How strong is the China threat that's unnerving U.S. allies there? A reply from the State Department. NTD White House correspondent Iris Tao asked about China's effort to block an American company from performing in South Korea. And a tug-of-war between world powers all about ports in South Asia, sitting on crucial trade routes that supply the world's oil. A congressional investigation. Are American retirement funds helping a top adversary? What do you think? Let us know below and subscribe if you haven't already. Welcome to China in Focus. I'm Don Ma in for Tiffany Meyer today. The U.S. grappling with one global challenge after another. America's top diplomat Antony Blinken arriving in South Korea on Wednesday. He's slated to talk to his counterpart about North Korea's close military ties with Russia. That's not the only issue that needs to be dealt with, though. Blinken was in Tokyo on Tuesday meeting with foreign ministers of the G7, world's 7 largest advanced economies.
The solid unity between Japan and the U.S. is especially critical at this time.
The group talked about a wide range of issues, from Israel-Hamas war to Russia's invasion of Ukraine to China.
We'll continue to de-risk our economies, to strengthen our resilience, to push back on economic coercion. We'll also continue to stand up to China over its actions in the South and East China Seas.
In the East China Sea, an increasingly aggressive Beijing is unnerving 2 U.S. treaty allies, Japan and South Korea. The communist regime is on its way to build a world-class military by 2049, and Japan may be nervous about it. It released a defense white paper saying China is Japan's, quote, greatest strategic challenge. Adding China, Russia, and North Korea have become the most complex security environment since World War II. Japan is also shooting for a 13% increase in its defense budget next year, over $53 billion. Chinese and Japanese Coast Guard ships also faced off near disputed islands this year. China and Russia's military jets also entered South Korea's air defense identification zone. South Korea scrambled its own fighter jets in response. Blinken's Asia trip comes on the heels of his visit to the Middle East. The top diplomat sending out one message. Despite the hot war in the Middle East, the threat in Asia is not being forgotten.
I think that's evidence of the fact that even as we are intensely focused on the crisis in Gaza, we're also very much engaged and focused on the important work that we're doing in the Indo-Pacific.
Blinken's next stop is India. He's set to join the defense dialogue there with Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. At the State Department briefing on Tuesday, NTD White House correspondent Iris Tao asked about China's economic coercion toward South Korea. In particular, ongoing efforts by the Chinese embassy in South Korea to block American performing arts company Shen from performing in the country. Here's what happened.
The classical Chinese dance show, which is widely popular around the world, is banned in China due to its portrayal of some human rights persecutions in mainland China. And the State Department told me that they continue to be concerned about such practices by Beijing to use its economic leverage to try to pressure our democratic allies. Watch.
Does it remain a concern by the State Department that in such incidents like this, China is using its economic pressure to influence the freedom of expression in an ally country?
Of course, continues to remain of concern. The PRC has a very clear track record of using economic coercion and otherwise in a wide array of countries. This is, of course, something that we're going to continue to address.
Meanwhile, President Biden is set to meet with China's Xi Jinping next week during the APEC summit in San Francisco. Of course, it remains to be seen how issues such as human rights abuses by China, as well as China's increasingly aggressive actions toward other countries, including espionage activities here in the U.S., will be discussed.
Shenyang Performing Arts is based in New York. According to its mission statement, the performance showcases Chinese culture before communism. NTD investigation revealed that the Chinese embassy in South Korea had pressured theaters there to keep Shenyang from appearing in the country. While Blinken is meeting with China's neighbors, the Chinese Communist Party has been busy ramping up its military ties with Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin is hosting a top Chinese general Wednesday. Putin said modern weapons will ensure the security of both Russia and China. But he added they do not intend to build a Cold War-style military alliance. The Russian defense minister also met with the Chinese general. That's the second meeting between the two in just 10 days. American investments into green energy could be turning red. Congress is now investigating whether U.S. pension funds are being used to fund the Chinese Communist Party. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the highlights from a recent hearing about ESG funds.
The goal of ESG is not better financial performance. It is to force compliance to one view.
The House Ways and Means Committee on Tuesday investigating retirement plans being invested into ESG funds. ESG stands for environmental, social and governance. In the past, pension managers had to aim for maximum profit over everything else. However, in 2022, the Biden administration changed the rules, saying they may consider climate change and other environmental, social and governance factors in selecting retirement investments. Numbers now show such investments do bring less returns.
They could have had 11.5% return, but they've only had a 4.5% return. That's not keeping pace with inflation.
This witness, Jason Isaac, former Texas state representative and director of LifePowered, says such investments do more damage besides hurting returns. Isaac says ESG funds directly play into the hands of the Chinese Communist Party, going as far as to call it the China ESG agenda. He says that as soon as rules changed in 2022, asset managers pulled their money out of American energy production, and they now use those same funds to instead invest in energy production in China. And Isaac explains the consequences of that. Take a look.
And we're seeing dollars flow into Iran from China to the tune of $50 to $80 billion because of the ESG agenda. And guess who's going to be buying the refined products that China is producing because they've expanded their refining capacity? The United States will be buying jet fuel, diesel, and home heating oil made from Iranian oil that is funding this war on terror.
Republican Congresswoman Claudia Tenney asked another one of the witnesses what people can do to counter the ESG trend.
Each of us as consumers need to have our voices heard. When we see companies politicizing their business like we saw with Bud Light and Target, that we don't patronize those businesses.
Democrats at the hearing often criticized Republicans for what they called wasting time on a hearing about ESG. They said there are more important topics to be discussed right now, such as funding the government, for example. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
War between the U.S. and China, and it all ties back to a seaport in Sri Lanka with a significant geopolitical significance. The U.S. announced over $550 million in financing on Wednesday for a port terminal in the Asian country. That's as Washington looks to curb Beijing's influence in the region. The investment is made by the U.S. International Development Finance Corps, a government agency. The project aims to transform the deep water port of Colombo into a world-class logistics hub.
That's really the priority of President Biden through his Partnership for Global Infrastructure and Investment, to have high-quality, high-standard projects that respect local laws and conditions, that are transparent, that don't burden countries with debt at a sovereign level, but instead help finance the private sector.
The announcement comes as Sri Lanka struggles to recover from a dire financial and economic crisis. China is the country's largest bilateral creditor, having lent out more than $7 billion in loans. Sri Lanka is a key player of Beijing's Belt and Road Initiative, an infrastructure outreach scheme that the U.S. has criticized as debt trap diplomacy. Through this project, Beijing also took hold of another port in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka borrowed money from China to build the port, but was later unable to pay back its debt. In exchange, Sri Lanka leased the port to China in 2017.
China has used its economy and its worldwide presence, diplomatic presence, to begin to reshape the world in its own image.
Sri Lanka's location makes it a prime target of the push-pull for influence between world powers. The island sits halfway between several trade routes responsible for bringing oil from the Middle East to areas around the world, including China. President Biden is slated to meet Chinese leader Xi Jinping next week. The talks are expected to become the highlight of a global summit in California. Hosted by the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, the organization's members represent 60% of global economic power. Thousands of world leaders and CEOs will attend the conference. Here's NTD's David Zhang with more on what to expect.
20,000 attendees representing 21 member economies will be in the city of San Francisco. But what are the highlights other than heightened security, massive road closures, and protests?
I think it's particularly significant this year because with the tension between the United States and China, the opportunity to have President Xi meet with President Biden is a very important one.
The White House announced last week that U.S. President Biden will meet with the Chinese leader Xi Jinping, making the first time the two leaders will speak in person since a year ago.
Chairman Xi is facing a lot of pressure of a downturn economy in China. He wants American business to go to China to make more investment, and he also wants Americans to buy more products from China. So that's why he's coming.
Both sides have been showing signs of easing up the tensions.
As I've said since the beginning of my administration, we seek competition, not conflict with China. We're not looking for a new Cold War.
Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen is also scheduled to host Chinese Vice Premier He Lifeng for 2 days for talks in San Francisco before the start of APEC summit. This all comes on the heels of California Governor Newsom's recent week-long visit to China and meeting with the Chinese President Xi. The key discussions of this year's summit will center around trade, technology transfer, and economic development.
The United States is very concerned about technology transfer to China. The United States has been very aggressive in pushing restrictions on semiconductors, and that's been a very important issue for us because we're very concerned about the transfer of technology to China, potentially for defense purposes.
But others are skeptical of China's position in the economic sector.
More than 90% of Americans have negative opinions about China. So I don't think Xi is going to be very successful to attract a lot of investments to China.
While APEC is intended to be an economic forum, political topics do come up during discussions among world leaders, especially when international tensions run high with the current Russia-Ukraine war and conflicts in the Middle East. Meanwhile, San Francisco is aggressively clearing homeless encampments, increasing drug-related arrests to improve the city's image as delegations arrive.
Germany is giving the green light of support for Taiwan's top semiconductor maker. The country's top competition regulator just approved investments from 3 German companies in a new semiconductor plant based in the German city of Dresden. The project has been dubbed the European Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, or ESMC, founded by Taiwanese chipmaker TSMC. Bosch, Infineon, and NXP will each purchase a 10% stake in the plant, with TSMC holding the remaining 70% and operating the plant. It's the Taiwanese company's first facility in Europe and one of just a handful outside of Taiwan and China. Berlin has been aiming to promote its domestic chip industry, which its automakers rely on. The announcement comes alongside a survey from the German Chamber of Industry and Commerce. It notes that of the 3,600 German companies polled, many are planning to invest more in North America, North Africa, the Middle East, and the Asia-Pacific region, excluding China and Taiwan. The caution toward the two comes amid growing tensions between Beijing and the West. And that's all for today's China in Focus on YouTube. We're now sharing a shortened version of our program here after being demonetized for more than 2 years. Last month, YouTube removed our demonetization status, but it reimposed it within days. If you would like to support us, subscribe to our partner platform Epoch TV or consider donating. Find us at donorbox.org/China-in-focus. Here's what to look out for in our second half. Beijing has loaned out over $1 trillion to developing countries as part of the Belt and Road Initiative. Has the outreach paid off for China and its economy? Or is the end near for Beijing's top infrastructure project? We sat down with China economic analyst Antonio Gracefo for his insight. Thanks for watching China in Focus. I'm Don Ma. See you soon.